All right, well, welcome, welcome, welcome. Now, our data, it's been called the new oil, the new gold, sand, even oxygen. And our government, it's been called endangered, enlightened, exemplary, and often experimental. And these are all words that embody both value, but also vulnerability. So it felt timely for us here at the Robert H. Smith School of Business to host a discussion about the future of both. And that's why we chose to focus our inaugural Future of Government Executive Panel on the future of data analytics in and, as importantly, for government. And we're really thrilled to see so many of you share our longstanding interest in the topic. So joining us tonight are 4 experts in the field. Janice DeGarmo, Director of the State Department's Office of Management, Strategy, and Solutions. Ted Kaouk, Chief Data Officer of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management and Chair of the Federal Cdo Council, and Monica McEwen, Managing Director of Deloitte's Government and Public Services AI and Data Practice. We're proud to note that Janice is an alumni of Smith, an MBA. Ted holds a PhD from our colleagues across campus in the School of Arts and Humanities. And Monica will consider you an honorable Terp for tonight. The panel will start with a moderated discourse with Professor Wendy Moe, our Dean's Professor of Marketing at Maryland Smith and co-director of the Smith Analytics Consortium. We'll then segue to some selected questions submitted by participants with their registration. And finally, time permitting, we'll open up the questions submitted by live chat. A few forum rules as we get started. Please keep your mics muted. Submit questions in the chat, preferably for all to see. And then if called on to ask or clarify a question, introduce yourself. Let us know who you are briefly, please. And note that this event is being recorded as communicated in the invitation. Finally, I want to thank our own executive sponsor of this event, the Dean of the Robert H. Smith School, Dean Prabhadev Kanana. And with that, Wendy, the room is yours.
Great, thank you, Frank. Thank you, Janice, Ted, and Monica for joining us, and thank you to everyone who is in attendance. I'm really excited to be able to moderate this panel. And so I'm just gonna jump right into it. I have several questions. I don't know if I'm gonna get through all of it because I do wanna leave time for the audience questions later, but let me just jump right in with Janice. Janice, you're a government executive at an agency that literally spans the globe with a perceived role in almost every international challenge it produces. A few years ago, you became the State Department's first ever Chief Data Officer, tasked to manage the data across the vast equities of that enterprise. Where did you start, and what have you learned about government data analysis?
Thanks, Wendy, and thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me. So yes, I've been at the State Department for about 10 years. I've worked in a variety of bureaus at the State Department and a variety of verticals. Mostly have been focused on operational issues. So in every single job I've ever had from an operational standpoint, I have always asked, you know, what does the data tell us? How can we use data to make our operations smarter, right? But to your point, Wendy, State Department, State Department is involved in just about every international challenge there is, and in fact, I learn literally every single day a new one that, you know, is like shocking to me. And so with those challenges comes solutions, right? And comes smarter ways to get to insights and get to actions. And for diplomacy and foreign policy, literally data and information is our currency. It is how we make decisions, and it is much more powerful when we can leverage it quickly and when we can combine it with other data and information available to us and make it available in a digestible way. So with that, I acknowledged when I joined this office here in the Office of Management, Strategy, and Solution, I acknowledged that there was a gap for that enterprise capability to really inform diplomacy. And just like anything, I would argue to be successful, I would say that we dreamt big, but we started small. And we basically said, how can data and analytics solve our foreign policy challenges? How can we solve problems? How can we add value? And we did that. And I will tell you, we didn't have buy-in across the board. State Department's 100,000 people spanning the globe. So we did, we focused on solving problems. We focused on solving their problems, not, so doing cool analytics in a cool glass room, but rather taking challenges in front of our diplomats and solving them and making them do their jobs better and smarter. So so we did that, and we started with a problem set analyzing Iranian exports, and with that we moved to solving 5G issues, COVID issues, cyber issues, economic issues, you name it, and we have grown from there. So I would say, our demand has eclipsed our ability to solve the problems, and it is that justification that we have used to grow a full functioning Center for Analytics and hire a full-time Chief Data Officer for the State Department. I have moved to a director's position, and I now have a full-time Chief Data Officer position, Dr. Matthew Gravis, who works for me. And we started with 3 data scientists and now have an organization of 150 by simply solving problems and adding value.
Great, thank you. I actually have another question for you about how you connect the data to the diplomats, but I'm going to hold on to that for a little later while I get to some of the other panelists by way of introduction. So my next question is for Ted. Ted, you've just been appointed the Chief Data Officer of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. It's actually your second role in government data leadership after some time as CDO at the Department of Agriculture. And along the way, you've led development for the federal Cdo Council. So on multiple fronts, you're also really blazing new trails for management and the use of government data. What trends have you noticed that arc across all of those different experiences?
Thanks for the question. Really appreciated Janice's first response. Good to be with her and Monica and all of you tonight. I think I'll start by talking a little bit about the USDA experience and how that led into some of our collaboration with other CDOs. I did start in the CDO role around the 2017 timeframe. And to Janice's point, I think there are a lot of similarities that you'll find at large agencies in government going back a couple of years, but some steps have been taken to actually make things better in terms of access to data and insights. At that time, this is a large agency like state. We have 29 agencies and offices, a very diverse mission set, and just briefly, things like 2,200 county offices, retail operations supporting farmers and conservation practices across the country, to the Forest Service managing forests across the country, the SNAP program, food safety inspection at meat and poultry plants across the country, international trade. So we also have overseas and have employees at embassies also with the State Department across the country. So very complex operation, and the same situation with unconnected data silos across the department is certainly something that we had to deal with at the beginning. Even very simple questions like how many vehicles does the agency have? Are they underutilized? How many employees do we have? Getting to an answer like that across all of those different agencies might have taken us weeks, requiring a lot of manual data calls. And there was really, this challenge was really common across all of our administrative areas, HR, finance, operations, and really not any different for our programs who were delivering support to citizens in the areas of farm loans or disaster assistance. And so making decisions, getting access to timely data for making decisions with regard to our citizen services and our underlying support was really, really challenging at that time. And so we had to address those challenges first, as Janice said, by engaging directly with our leadership and field leaders in terms of the questions that they had, standing up enterprise analytics platforms, integrating the data, bringing teams to deploy new products and automating that data. And again, really focused on the needs of those individual programs. So we have 8 missionaries, as I mentioned, again, very diverse programs and needs. Again, everything from employee attrition to fighting forest fires to understanding the impact of research. And just getting started with these activities was a major undertaking in terms of moving from skepticism and suspicion to hope and optimism, building the products and then changing the culture. Having those products available for our field leaders to be able to make decisions better really began to lead into greater investment. I think this is another theme that Janice mentioned. For us, it was having a centralized analytics service that we could provide to the department at the department level, but also establishing effectively chief data officers in each of our mission areas. We called them assistant chief data officers. So we had a centralized governance approach, but each of those assistant chief data officers has stood up teams that are centralized to help support their program areas, but it also helps us to collaborate and integrate and answer questions where there's a cross-agency need or an area where we need to blend data. So the training, the staffing, the technical capabilities, those are all part of the overall strategy at USDA. And then, when we started to have conversations with other CDOs, with the establishment of the Evidence Act, that meant that each agency across government was required to have a CDO. That's how I had the good fortune to meet and interact with Janice and begin to collaborate. We saw that each agency had very similar challenges with regard to answering those questions, training the staff, inventorying data, just getting a sense of what their maturity level was. And so that's where we began to collaborate. And I think, interestingly enough, looking also at how we can share data and look at cross-agency analytics needs as well. So I remember working with Janice very early on in the pandemic to try to identify where we had cross-agency needs. And that was our COVID-19 data working group, which Janice actually led as we stood up the Cdo Council, where we were able to create products and collaborate with State Department on international tools and domestic tools and provide those to agencies. But it also highlighted a lot of the challenges that we have to address still with our underlying infrastructure so that we can better share data across agencies and better collaborate. And so what you're seeing now is a cadre of these CDOs, which is essentially a new profession in government, learning together, trying to establish these best practices, and then also trying to get the same level of engagement. It's really impressive to see the work that folks like Janice have done to stand up teams so quickly and services so quickly, and to see the agencies respond to that because of the needs that they have. So I think the establishment of those positions was, I think, by Congress, a wise decision, and we're seeing the impact of those practices as they're stood up across government.
Great, thank you. I heard a theme in there that was similar to what Janice was saying about getting data to the diplomats, and you're working to centrally get data, but out to the field to support their work. So I'm going to come back to that in a little bit, but right now I'm going to turn to Monica. So Monica, at Deloitte, you enjoy a unique perspective across both private and public sectors, best practices in data and analytics. In general, what do you see government agencies getting right, and what do you think they could improve?
Yeah, so I think COVID's really brought a spotlight to the importance of data across all organizations. And I think it's really accelerated what some people are calling digital transformation, data modernization, but data has really become the most powerful asset that an organization has. And, in the retail space, for instance, with our ever-changing supply chains during COVID, retailers were more reliant on data than ever before. Likewise, Ted and Janice just walked through some great examples in the federal government space, but local governments have been using and sharing data in ways that had not been considered before the pandemic. They're using it to help track the spread of the virus in their communities or rollout of the vaccines, et cetera. Ted just talked a little bit about the Cdo Council, and I think that the government has made huge strides in the last 3 years since the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act was passed, and then the stand-up of the Cdo Council, which Ted leads. The council's vision is really to improve the use of government data to improve decision-making and operations. And some tangible examples of the work that this council has done and the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act have helped to implement is every agency now has to have a CDO. Every agency has to put together a data catalog or enterprise data standards. They have to make portions of their data machine readable for external use. And these are really tactical and tangible examples, but they're helping to make data more of a kind of at the forefront of everybody's mind across an agency, not just that of the CDOs. So I think we've made huge strides. I do think there's still challenges in some government agencies. I think what Ted just walked through and what he was able to accomplish at USDA and the work that Janice is doing at the State Department are two great examples of very mature organizations, but there's some government agencies that aren't yet quite as mature. And Ted alluded to some of the legacy technologies that many government agencies have. So there are still agencies that are doing manual data calls, that are taking data from mainframes and dumping it into Excel spreadsheets. And so there's still a bit of a gap in terms of catching up to agencies being able to use modern technology standards. And then there's the skills gap. So Janice talked about growing her team from 3 data scientists to 150. There's some agencies that still are, in the double digits in terms of the number of data scientists that they have. So I think we've made a lot of progress, and some agencies are a bit more forward leaning in terms of how quickly they've progressed in their data journey. But I think the biggest challenges are still some of the technology, legacy technology that exists within agencies, and trying to make sure that agencies are identifying budgets that allow them to bring in the right technologies and the right skills to implement all of these great data standards. Is going to be really important as they move forward. Janice made a really good point of getting some quick wins to show the value of the data, which then allow you to go back and ask for that additional budget and continue to grow out the teams and continue to build out the technology.
Great, thank you. So in terms of some of these agencies maturing in their data capabilities, let me ask Ted this question. So OPM recently issued federal position classifications for data scientist professionals. Can you talk about what the significance of this is and how it fits into other initiatives for government data analytics?
It's a great question. So I think I'll just start a little bit with the Cdo Council in terms of the kinds of things we've been looking at. We've worked to actually think about this overall profession of CDOs, developing resources for the CDO profession, the teams we're building. So that kind of is a broad array of data skills and data literacy and data acumen and training programs that we're implementing across government, as well as the new CDO function. The data science activity in particular has been of particular interest, where we want to recruit new talent into government. I think, we want to obviously interested in speaking to this group about that in particular, because we think that, the government has a competitive advantage in certain aspects. One is the amount of impact that you can have in government when you have the kind of skills that Janice's team is bringing to bear on their key problems. And so, recruiting and being able to bring in that data science talent that we need in government to deliver on the promise of the kind of work that's happening across government is something we want to emphasize. We did support and launch our first government-wide data science hiring action this year to bring new talent into government, and that's I know Janice made a number of hires to add to her team through that recruitment action, and so the release of a data science series or occupation within the federal government is, I think, a pretty significant step for us to codify that profession, to signal the need, and to be able to support the need to recruit professional data scientists and people who have majored in data science. So, I think most people are familiar, but I'll just say, primary requirements are taking professional knowledge of computer science and mathematical and statistical theories and techniques, gathering and analyzing that data. We also have created some flexibilities for domain-specific data scientists within that series, things like epidemiology, medical and healthcare series, where we know the domain expertise is really important. But I think the bottom line, Wendy, is that we're seeing a tremendous need and demand signal from agencies, and so we want to communicate that, and also just encourage folks to consider that as a career option, because we certainly could use your help and expertise to further our mission.
Great, thank you. So let me circle back at this point to the issue that I mentioned earlier about connecting the data to the field. So Ted used the word field. Janice, you were talking about your diplomats. That's and I think there were, I've heard the term data informed diplomacy. And so maybe we can start with you, Janice, in terms of what are some of the processes and some of the issues that you've had to deal with to connect your data to the diplomats and these diplomacy issues, and what are some of the challenges you've had to face? And the same question applies to you, Ted, on this in terms of getting data down to the field officers.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy. And I would say, so again, I would just first I will reiterate, let's solve problems in front of our diplomats first, right? But this is just part of it. So yeah, we're tapped to work on a variety of issues, right? With the Afghanistan drawdown and evacuation, CFA was running my Center for Analytics was running a 60-person task force for that, right? Working across federal agencies on that for global COVID risk and now as it's morphed into getting vaccines out globally, we're at the center of sort of that data analysis. And we're working on diversity and inclusion issues so that we can track and baseline our workforce better. We're working on how to be able to quickly shift our global presence depending on our strategic priorities at any given time. We're working, the international organization and UN has asked that we look at how we can use data to be more predictive in voting patterns for international organizations. So these are some of the types of problems that our diplomats, our senior leaders bring to us as issues. But here's what I would say, and Ted mentioned this, as did Monica, all of the other important stuff. So analytics are just sort of one part of imbuing a data culture in a diverse organization, especially as big as the State Department. Again, 100,000 people across the globe. Diplomacy has always historically been seen as an art. Data analytics is a science. We very specifically chose the word data informed to say that, we are not replacing diplomacy, we are augmenting it, we are propelling decision making to as much as possible. But what I would say is all of those examples that I mentioned of problem sets that we are working with our diplomats, with our senior leaders on, are just use cases and are examples that give us credibility to be able to grow and feed and care for the other parts of imbuing a data culture organization. And when I say those other parts, again, Ted got to it and is doing a ton of work in this space. Monica reflected it as well. But this is where we have to talk about training and upskilling our workforce. We have to talk about culture and making sure that at every single angle, our senior leaders and our managers and our leaders and our employees are saying, what does the data say? Where's the evidence? Right? It gets to data governance. I have to tell you, when I stood up the Center for Analytics, I didn't lead with, we need to govern our data. No one wanted to talk about that. They wanted, now we have enough credibility to talk about data governance, right? And we have people at the table. It's also the technology and architecture. It's the tools. It's our data management. So all of that, and you've often seen that picture of an iceberg where the top of it is the sexy dashboard and the tool, the decision to support tool that someone is using to make decisions, and then underneath it is everything else you don't see, and all of the stuff that the data cleansing and the governance and the architecture and the tools that are needed in the platform, right? And that you cannot move the needle on a data culture without really investing in that. So we use analytics to give us credibility and an ability to get resources and attention on everything else. So in the last 6 months, we did release our first enterprise data strategy. And it has those sort of four pillars, right? It has the analytics piece, but it also has data governance, data management, and technology. And then under sort of across all of those is that data culture. So we and that is what I think. I'll tell you, Wendy, you know, we have, again, 100,000 people, and our business model in the Center for Analytics can never be to have everyone come to our organization for help, because that we're never, that it won't happen. And so again, we're looking to empower them. So we did just release the first, for example, the training. We have 7 courses that we now have, everything from data acumen for executives to data visualization using Tableau, right? So a good diverse. We also have created a platform called Data at State that is a one-stop shop that brings together data, cleansed data for our diplomats to use without having to come to us. So, you know, it has all of our products. It has the tools, you know, you need Python, you need this, you need whatever tool, it's all on there. And it's sort of that self-service for our employees across the globe. And I think that if we can continue to sort of build that empowerment capability, as well as keep our analytics, you know, problem solving, I think, and invest in that and bring in more of that skill set to the workforce, that's when we will really build a data focused culture. And I think, thank you to Monica for saying we're mature. I think we have a lot. State Department is we still have a lot of room to grow. And the good news is, you know, we're on our way.
Ted, did you want to add to that?
I don't know much. I don't know what I can add to that. Maybe just a couple things. Janice covered a great number of issues there that I agree with wholeheartedly. Just a couple of vignettes that I think maybe build just really quickly on what Janice was saying is the iterative nature of building the buy-in, starting with delivering value to her point. One area that we found, one problem that we tried to tackle as a large enterprise with 19 different agencies was, how do we approach analytic product development as a large agency, where we want our secretary to have access to all the insights that are strategically needed for the secretary and their teams to be able to make strategic decisions, but also enabling the edge in the program areas to manage their questions as well at the appropriate level. And so that problem emerged as we started to engage in our product development. The first thing was around, you know, thinking about customer experience and actually product design. Believe it or not, we actually had one template for dashboards across the entire agency, so that we could have a common look and feel. And if leaders went into a dashboard looking at the enterprise HR dashboards, or they went into their specific mission area looking at forest wildfire risk, it didn't matter who developed it, they would much more easily be able to get in and find the insights that they needed. And that was a big push. And it really started with identifying the questions that people had, using design thinking sessions to do that. So connecting our data analysts to the kind of creative ideation around getting the biggest questions was a really key part of getting to the right products, doing iterative development, and then having some governance where there were certain dashboards that we didn't need to create 19 times across 19 different agencies, but there was the need to be able to extend the ability to agencies to create what they need without getting in their way. And so establishing those assistant chief data officers, having governance discussions around the products that are being created, and then being able to have visibility to what was being created. Quite often we would find that a product being developed out by a program area on something like time to hire was getting a lot of attention. And by looking at analytics on that, we were able to figure out what might be a benefit to the enterprise. And so actually scaling those products as they were developing and just getting that alignment and economies of scale. And all of the issues that Janice mentioned around skills development and all the underlying issues, I think were critical. The final thing I'll mention is just being comfortable with prioritizing and surfacing the issues. So if there were data quality issues, we would likely create the data product and then show them so that leaders could see, hey, here's an underlying issue that's been buried for years. For us to get these insights, here's where we are and here's what we need to do to be able to get better. And here's how we're going to do it. And because you told us it was important, we're going to make it a priority.
Perfect, thank you. I want to be mindful of time because I see a whole bunch of great questions coming in through the chat, and I know we had a couple of pre-selected questions. So I know I have one more question that no one else is going to ask, but I think it's going to be of great value to our students. So I'm going to ask each of the three of you, if we can start with Monica, a career advice question for our students. So all three of you have great management and leadership experience in data and data analytics, but none of you have a computer science degree to start. And so, I think that's very interesting. So if you could all just provide our students, if you can each choose one piece of advice that you would impart on them, what would your advice be for any business, social science, or humanities student who might someday want to be a CDO? What would you advise for them? Monica.
Yeah, so I think my piece of advice would be I started in the data space right out of school. I didn't have any technical background at all, but I sort of stumbled my way into it, to be honest, and never looked back, because what was so interesting to me, especially in government analytics, is the wide variety of domain use cases. It's Janice and Ted just both talked about some of them, but everything in current times from nationwide vaccine rollout, looking at like mission readiness of our armed forces, fighting our climate crisis, investigative analytics. There's just so many different and diverse use cases across the government space. And once you start to understand some of those domain areas and you start to think about what Janice talked a lot about, is like, what does the data tell us? What would be valuable for an end user to be able to make more informed decisions to ultimately improve the lives of citizens or impact policy and decision making. So there's such far-reaching implications of the data that we use in government that just have such huge mission impact. And so find that domain area that you're interested in. You will get hooked, and then you will probably learn other domain areas, but just find that thing that drives your passion in terms of a set of expertise in a business or mission area. The technical stuff you can learn along the way. That would be my advice.
Great, Janice.
Yeah, no, I think Monica nailed it, but I would say, honestly, I was thinking about this question because I think about half of my staff within my Center for Analytics I'd say I think about half are probably have some sort of STEM degree, and half probably have some sort of social sciences degree. And I have my MBA. I was the one who sort of recognized the need for a enterprise analytics capability. I used the business acumen to stand up the organization and built the business model and be sort of iterative. My CDO is Dr. Matthew Gravis. He's a systems engineer. His deputy CDO is, I think, a political science degree. So I think I would say, I think you have to have a love for whatever sort of vertical you're in, as Monica said, but I think you have to love problem solving. You need to ultimately love to solve problems and think outside the box. And obviously using data to solve those problems would be key to it. So that would be my advice.
Great. Ted, you're in the unenviable spot of being the last one to answer that question.
Okay, well, I think, first I wouldn't worry about your particular major, and I'll start with a caveat that I'm not sure you'd want to fit any predictive models to my personal data point. A total set of CDOs globally who have started with graduate degrees in Shakespeare studies may be in this virtual room sitting in my chair, but I think overall, like the points that Janice and Monica made, I think are really important, and I think I might speak to the value of liberal arts education in general, even for a role like a CDO, where I think one, just having a conviction, understanding kind of why you're doing what you're doing in your life overall is an incredibly powerful resource. ongoing curiosity and continual learning, and then the appreciation for the complex intersections of different domains of expertise is another one. And I think that's something that, regardless of your major, if you can cultivate that as you're in school, I think is really, really valuable over the course of your career, because there is no preparation for the kinds of complex issues that Janice is dealing with. There really is a need to be curious and to continually to be applying yourself to that. So for me, it was always being curious about new ideas. I remember walking around McKeldin Library reading Hannah Arendt and being blown away by, her attempt to explain totalitarianism. I remember reading, Thinking Fast and Slow, when that book came out, and just being blown away that was something we had totally missed about human behavior. Although I'll say Shakespeare probably picked up on it if you want to read Act 1, Scene 1 of Merchant of Venice. But beyond that, just recognizing that there are so many domains that a CDO has to be working in. You can't know them all. You can't know everything from data science to data visualization to communication, training, team building, human-centered design, which I found to be incredibly powerful, but did not expect that going in when we first developed our data strategy, federal data policy, and then domain expertise. So I just relax and say, you can't know everything. And so that means that if you're curious and you can keep learning, you'll find a way to add value. And I think that's that ability to think across lines is where the CDO role, I think, has an opportunity to add a lot of value, and the teams that support the CDO.
Thank you so much. That's great advice for the students. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Frank to moderate audience questions.
Great, thanks, Wendy, and thanks to all our panelists. So now for some participant questions that were submitted with the registrations for tonight's events. We're going to start with Neffy Bradley. So Neffy, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you all for being able to join us today. My name is Nephi. I'm a Marine Corps veteran and recent Smith alum with a master's in supply chain management, interested in actually joining the State Department in a few years after I build up a little bit more expertise in analytics. And my question is, the government has a stigma of being slow to adapt to technical solutions. And do you feel this is a stereotype or still a very real problem? And what else are you doing to work to address this problem?
Monica, would you like to take a stab at that in sort of your perspective, looking at?
Yeah, sure. I think you've seen from Ted and Janice the passion that they have around the work that they're doing across the departments that they're supporting, and you'll see this across government. I mean, I think there is a stigma that perhaps people are slow to adapt, but you're seeing right now real world examples of just the opposite, and I think we're seeing more and more of that across the government in recent years. And so there are certainly still pockets of government that are slow to adapt new technology solutions, but the government's done a lot to address this. There's been creative contracting vehicles, things called OTAs, other transaction authorities, that have come to allow organizations to bring in the innovative technology from Silicon Valley and to test it and to see if it's going to work in a real world environment. And so I think we're making really big strides in terms of moving away from that stigma of being slow to react and instead being much more proactive in trying to get ahead of the trends that are happening in the market and get ahead of these new technologies that are making themselves available. And certainly some of those, the stigmas, I guess, or there's some rationale behind the government being careful about bringing new technologies in, right? Some of the data that the government is handling is the most sensitive in the world. And so being able to ensure that the technology is going to pass through the security approvals and everything else that agencies have is obviously a really big part of it. But I think we're also getting better at that in terms of government agencies, streamlining that to still ensure that the technologies will meet their standards, and yet trying to improve the process that it takes to get new technologies through that process. Janice or Ted, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
No, I think Monica, that's pretty spot on. I will say I do think there are a government has a unique set of challenges when it comes to adapting new technology. There is a from a technological and practical, and system security standpoint, there are more steps in that process. And from a cultural standpoint, that also has to adapt. I will tell you, over the past, I'd say, especially since COVID, I would say that has significantly improved. And at least at state, as we have taken on a sort of a problem use case approach to everything we do, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. So when we can talk about, if we talk about just a data platform and bringing on a new data platform at state, that takes a while. But if we talk about, we need a new data platform because our crisis management after Afghanistan wasn't as tight as it should have been, then you have people listening, right? So as we sort of take that approach and people get comfortable with being more iterative, we're improving. But it's a good question, and we still have some work to do.
Thank you. The next question is going to be from Matthew Wilson, one of our alumni. Matthew, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, hi, good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay, perfect. Just want to do a comm check. Yeah, hi, I'm Matt Wilson. I'm a program manager with the Department of Navy. This is a topic near and dear to my heart since I got my start in the government service as a data analyst intern years ago. So my question, multi-part question for the panel. So one, I'm just curious, what are the other agencies doing to ensure data integrity? And by what I mean by that, you're ensuring that the data is correct and accurate, because the famous saying goes, garbage in, garbage out in our databases that we use for analytics for decision making. And also, how are you also protecting it as well? Because cybersecurity is a growing threat when it comes to protecting our data. And then the second question is, what are the other agencies doing to ensure ease of access and usability? And what I mean by that, we kind of touched on it earlier. When we have these data calls, do we have ways of where we can pull, extrapolate, interpret, and provide the information in a useful, meaningful way to help make those decisions? Over.
Ted, is that something you could address as from your perch on the Cdo Council?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I would draw your attention to is to the federal data strategy. I think that's a good place to look for the kinds of activities that agencies are engaged in and the activities that they need to engage in to be able to advance the kinds of capabilities that you're referencing there. So federal data strategy outlines 6 individual agency actions that agencies are taking across government. And those involve things, many of the things that we've talked about already today, but identifying the data that's needed to answer agency questions, but also identifying those priority questions. Again, it's important for us to prioritize, for us to focus on where we need to make the improvements most across the enterprise, and then to build from there. Standing up governance boards that are focused on creating data strategies. So Janice mentioned the data strategy that was the State Department published, USDA and other agencies have also published their data strategies, really looking at what's needed for us to be able to bring the capabilities forward to ensure that we've got training around things like data stewardship, data quality, and again, with a focus on technological innovation to support those activities, but also the human skills needed to make sure that the data is fit for use. Another piece of this is also broadening people's perspectives about where data is used, right? So as we ask these questions about that we have to solve as an agency, what we begin to see is that data that was created for one purpose may be needed elsewhere. And as those use cases begin to proliferate, people who are maybe used to more of a data ownership mentality move into more of a stewardship where they begin to work across organizational lines. That not only helps us internally to inventory, to catalog our data, to make it available with role-based access and to protect it, but also to build capabilities where we're able to provide better data to the public and to researchers and to those outside of our organizations who need it. So I think holistically, the federal data strategy creates a number of steps that agencies are following that are the right roadmap for us to improve in all the areas that you mentioned, and that includes integrity, security, and access, which I think were the key parts of your question. Let me know if I missed something there.
Yeah, and Ted, I'll just add on the Department of Defense side, Matthew, since you're in the Navy, the Air Force has done an exceptional job here. General Kim Kreider was the first ever Air Force CDO, and she really started by developing a strategy that included the entire command, but thought about how do we get some cross-cutting high priority use cases that help us drive adoption really rapidly. And so she got that. She then rotated over to Space Command, and Eileen Vadrine moved in as a CDO and stood up a platform called Vault, and Vault stands for Visible, Accessible, Understandable, Linked, and Trustworthy. And the platform has really been designed with a series of technology, obviously, to help create an operational platform for data use across the entire Air Force. The Air Force has also made huge investment in the concept of making data and analytics really like a career destination for the Air Force and improving the data literacy and the data fluency across the organization. So to Ted's point, it's about making the data secure, but also making sure that when the data gets into the hands of the users, they know how to use it appropriately as well. So I think it's a combination of, that Vault platform is a combination of some technology that helps support the governance and the accessibility of the data, and then the data fluency and the data literacy from the user perspective.
Great, thank you. Our next question is going to get a little bit more personal. So this is from Raymond. Raymond, are you with us? Can you ask your question?
Yeah, I'm with her. Can you hear me?
Gotcha. Yep.
Okay. Hi, my name is Raymond. I'm a senior information systems major at the Robert H. Smith School. I want to at least understand a little bit more of the life of a data analyst. So my question is what goes on in the daily life as a data analyst?
Janice, would you mind?
Janice, you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to start. I think it's varied. It's a great question. I will say, our data scientists are, we basically have an intake process where our clients are the bureaus, the senior leaders, our diplomats, our employees across the board are bringing us challenges and problem sets, and then we put together pods of data scientists to work with those organizations to help solve their problems. And so on a daily basis, they are working with the policy or management expert, whatever problem set they're working on. They're going back and running their models. There's a lot of interaction. There's a lot of iterating, presenting. There is collaboration across the board with our data scientists and then our technical side, and in terms of how to display. Like many other organizations, we have a lot of checks and balances we have a chief data scientist who's reviewing a lot of this stuff. So I would say I think it's the best job. I think it's the best job around. They get to, on any given day, work on serious, impactful issues and make a difference, and work across the board. And I think one of my favorite things about the work we do is it's just such a wide array of challenges that the issues, you will never be bored. But I will say the hustle is real. There's a lot of demand, and it's a fast, iterative, very fast-paced, fun place to work.
Janice, I could add a couple things there. I mean, I think what Janice is pointing to is I've never seen the data analysts and data scientists who are really, really successful. I've never seen anyone get more job satisfaction than those people, especially today. Now, I might say a few things about what I've seen make those people successful, and then because all day, every day, the people who are doing really well, their customers and the people they work with are just so excited to work with them because they are changing their world. And what I've seen from those who've been most successful are those who have really good listening skills and have actually cultivated the ability to work with people to really understand the problems that they're trying to solve. and then combining that with the data science and data analytics skills that they have. So, I think getting in and learning the domain expertise, finding the subject matter experts, really being able to listen to them, and then also to be able to add, bring in from the outside other kinds of ideas. We got a question one time from senior leadership at our research agencies at USD, really wanting to understand the impact of research and where the analysis for that would lead. When they asked a question, wasn't really defined ahead of time, right? But we did want to encourage them to ask the questions that they had so that we could start to think about them. And this particular problem set ended up going to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and getting access to data on patents and using natural language processing to trace research funded by USDA and looking at where the investment had led to patents and where, and providing insights that was a part of answering that question. And if we hadn't taken that approach and that person hadn't had the ability to listen to the question, understand where it might lead, we wouldn't have gotten to the right solution. But I can tell you that it was really exciting when you're able to bring back those insights to people who are really trying to solve a problem and don't know how to do it.
That's great. Well, thank you. The final pre-selected question is going to come from Andrew Bogage. Are you with us, Andrew?
I am, yes. Thanks, Frank. My name is Andrew Blagajich. I spent the last 6 years engaging with more of the private sector, consulting with individuals on developing data and analytics strategies. And so when it comes to government, more so for the group, from a 2030 projection, what current data and analytics initiatives will materially impact the daily lives of the everyday citizen, and how so?
Monica, would you like to?
Yeah, I'll take a stab here. So I think there's, the data field continues to evolve. I've been in it for longer than I care to admit. And I remember at one point in my career being like, am I gonna be able to do this my whole career? And it just keeps getting more and more exciting. And so I think that the next thing we're gonna see is the impact of AI and automation. So much that goes on behind the scenes as citizens. We kind of take citizen services for granted a lot of the times, but I think we're going to see even more advancements in coming years. And so automation will allow government agencies to give us as citizens more of that Amazon-like experience. When you go into Amazon and you buy something, it suggests other things that you might be interested in, or it remembers your buying behavior, it remembers who you are. So I can see, for example, in the future, when you go to renew your license in the local state that you live in, there will be a reach back to say, hey, did you also know your passport's up for renewal? And there'll be this kind of cross data collaboration between state and federal government, and then the automation that will be built in will make the citizen experience that much more seamless when we engage. That's my prediction for 2030.
That's great. Janice or Ted?
No, actually, I think Monica provided a really good example there around something we're thinking about called the moments that matter and the customer experience. So I think bringing together that customer experience with data for the average citizen is going to be a key part of the innovation. Thinking coming over to OPM and have been there for about 3 months, just thinking about that we have data on the largest workforce in the country. And so from the perspective of providing information that they can leverage throughout their career on their employment in government, I think there's an opportunity to do something similar for those employees. I think the overall federal data strategy is likely to lead to material impacts because data is going to be more readily available. But obviously there's an incredible amount of analytics and lessons learned from the pandemic that I think are going to pay dividends in those specific domains, but also in relationship to what Janice was mentioning about the impact of urgent needs leading to innovation. So sharing data across government, that the translation of what's been invested in those areas and the capabilities that they've helped to stand up. I'm curious if Janice agrees with that statement as you're talking about specific urgent issues you're addressing.
No, I think that's right, Ted. And I would say it will be, I hope, that by 2030, I think as agencies really leverage data as a strategic asset and sort of bring it to the table, and coupled with the fact that we're going to have more of this skill set in our workforce, I also think it's going to propel sort of government partnerships more across the board and automation across the board, across the government space. But I think what is even better is we're starting to see that private public partnership really coming together, and starting to see how that can start to fuse and be even smarter. So I'm also looking forward to that.
Great, thank you. So I think we have time for one audience question before we wrap up. We're going to have to kind of handle it fairly quickly. So we had one from Chris K. I'm going to go ahead and ask it, and then Chris, you can jump in if you want to clarify. So what are some of the ways that leaders in government are breaking down the red tape and silos between legacy systems and data sources? Monica, I think you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think Janice and Ted have given you some really good examples today of really focusing on what do the business leaders need, what do the mission owners need, and let's focus on the problem they're trying to solve and what data is going to help with that problem. And I think when you can use that lens when you're approaching a data or a technology problem, is what is the mission impact going to be if we can get this data into the hands of the right users? That helps remove a lot of the red tape, right? When you're able to actually have that mission impact. So I think focusing on the business problem and then focusing on the business leaders that need access to that. And then you back into what is the technology that can help enable this. Really helps to break down the silos, because you can get those quick wins and prove the value of not only the data, but also the modern technologies to help continue to drive innovation. Ted or Janice, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, data integration for data integration's sake is not going to help us to get, past the silos. Really getting people to ask the biggest and best questions that they have. Sometimes people ask small questions because they think about the data they already have access to. So, one of the techniques we use is to really get people in a creative space. And then the story emerges around why we have to move into a different direction. We let the leaders tell us what questions they have. We go and identify the data, and lo and behold, there's a need for integration and for breaking down the silos that presents itself, and the business case kind of emerges from that. And then you kind of rinse and repeat as you kind of engage in that. But I think the idea of holistically moving all the data to a central platform or something like that doesn't really get us very far. It just took actually asking people for the first time what their actual questions were.
Terrific. Well, I'm afraid that takes us to the close of our hour here. Thank you all for joining us. Particular thanks to Janice, Ted, Monica, and Wendy for really a fascinating hour of discussion. For everyone who joined us in the audience, if you enjoyed it, please stay posted for more events from Marilyn Smith as part of our Future of Government Management initiative. This is, we really hope, just the beginning of many more conversations about our future across the public and private sector. So thank you, and good night to you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Great crowd.
Thank you all.